The folder was in my brother's hands, not just any folder. The one with the green tab. The one I kept in the locked drawer of my home office filing cabinet. The one that held the original, notarized, court-filed last will and testament of our father, along with the durable power of attorney document that named me and only me as executor of his estate. My brother was standing in the middle of my living room, holding it open, reading it like it was a takeout menu. I remember the exact sensation in my chest. Not panic. Something colder than that. "You weren't supposed to be here," I said. He looked up at me and smiled. The same smile he'd been using since we were kids to get out of trouble. The one that used to work on our mother. "Relax, Maya. I was just looking for the charger you borrowed. Door was unlocked." The door was not unlocked. I had locked it. I always locked it. I am an estate planning attorney. Locking doors is practically part of my job description. I did not say any of that out loud. I set my bag down on the counter. I kept my voice very, very even. "Put that back." He tilted his head, still smiling, and looked back down at the papers. "Dad left the house to both of us, right? That's what he always said. Equal split." "Put it back, Daniel." He turned to the page. "Before I tell you what happened next, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. I read every single one. My name is Maya. I'm 31 years old. I passed the bar on my first attempt, built my own practice from a one-room office above a dry cleaner in Philadelphia, and by the time my father got sick, I was the one handling his affairs. Not because I pushed for it, but because I was the only one in the family who understood what affairs meant in the legal sense. My brother Daniel was 35, lived 40 minutes away in the suburb where we grew up, and had, over the previous 6 years, accumulated enough gambling debt that 2 different men had shown up at our mother's front door asking for him. My father knew this. Toward the end, he was very clear about what he wanted. The house, a 3-bedroom colonial in Bucks County worth just under $400,000, was to go to me with the provision that our mother could live there for the remainder of her life. Daniel would receive a cash disbursement of $40,000, which my father considered generous given the circumstances. My father had watched Daniel drain his own savings twice. He was not interested in watching Daniel drain mine. I drafted the will myself, under the supervision of a senior partner at my old firm, to avoid any conflict of interest. It was witnessed, notarized, and filed with the Register of Wills in Philadelphia. I kept the original in my home office filing cabinet in a locked drawer because I am, again, an estate planning attorney, and I understand better than most people what happens when original documents go missing. My father passed in February. Daniel came to the funeral in a suit that still had the tags on it and cried loudly enough that several people commented on it afterward, which I found notable because in the 14 months my father was sick, Daniel visited 4 times. After the funeral, I told Daniel that we would meet with the court-appointed representative in the spring to go through the probate process. He nodded. He seemed fine. He asked if there was food at the reception and then ate most of the shrimp. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. 3 months later, on a Thursday evening in May, I came home from a client meeting to find my front door unlocked and my brother standing in my living room holding my father's will. What I did not do, raise my voice, cry, demand an explanation, make any sudden movements whatsoever. What I did, walk to the kitchen, pour myself a glass of water and watch him. He hadn't noticed the camera. I had installed a small indoor security camera on the bookshelf 6 months prior, after a neighbor's apartment was broken into. It was angled to cover the front door and the main living area. It had been recording since the moment he walked in. It was also connected to my phone. I had received a motion alert notification at 6:14 p.m. while I was still in the car. I had watched, on my phone screen, as my brother used what I would later confirm was a copied key, one I hadn't realized existed, to let himself in, go directly to my home office, and come back out holding the green tabbed folder. He had not been looking for a charger. "So the house goes to you," he said, still reading, "and I get $40,000. He said the number the way you'd say the price of a used appliance, unimpressed, dismissive. "That's what it says," I said. He closed the folder. He looked at me with an expression I had seen before. Not quite anger, more like the face of someone who has already decided the rules don't apply to them and is just waiting for everyone else to catch up. Dad told me it was equal. He told me that for years. Dad told you a lot of things, I said. That document is what he signed. Daniel set the folder down on my coffee table. Not back in the office, on my coffee table. Then he pulled out his phone, and before I understood what he was doing, he had photographed every page. I watched him do it. I did not stop him, because here is what I already knew, standing in that living room that my brother did not know I knew. Photographing a will doesn't give you the will. And what Daniel was going to do with those photographs, I had already begun to understand what that was going to be. He handed me back the folder with a small, satisfied nod. I just want to make sure I have a copy, he said. For my records. Of course, I said. He left. I locked the door behind him. I stood in my kitchen for a long moment, looking at the folder on the coffee table where he'd left it. And I thought about the look on his face when he'd photographed those pages. That look wasn't about having a copy for his records. That look was about having a blueprint. I called my colleague Rachel, who specializes in probate litigation, and told her what had happened. She was quiet for a moment and then said, "Do you think he's going to try to contest?" "I think he's going to try something worse," I said. I was right. 6 weeks later, I received a call from the Register of Wills office. A woman named Patricia, very professional, very careful, told me that a document had been filed that morning, a handwritten codicil dated 3 weeks before my father's death, purporting to amend the will to a 50-50 split of all estate assets. It bore my father's signature. It bore 2 witness signatures. It had been notarized. "I need you to hold that document," I said. "Do not process it. I am the estate attorney of record, and I am telling you formally, right now, that document is fraudulent." Patricia was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Then she said, "I'm going to need that in writing." "You'll have it within the hour," I said. I sat down at my desk and I was very still for a moment. My father, by the time of the date on that codicil, had been on palliative care for 11 days. He had been on a morphine drip. He had not been lucid enough to sign his own name, let alone draft an amendment to a legal document. I had been there. I had sat with him every single day. I had held his hand and read to him and watched him breathe. Daniel had visited once that month, for 45 minutes, on a Tuesday afternoon when I had stepped out to get lunch for the nurses. I filed the formal objection within the hour as promised. I attached the hospice records documenting my father's condition. I attached the nursing notes. I attached the visiting log, which showed Daniel's single 45-minute visit. I attached the security footage from my living room, time-stamped, showing Daniel entering my home without permission and photographing the original will. Then I made a phone call to a man I had gone to law school with, who now worked in the Philadelphia District Attorney's office, and I told him I had what appeared to be a case of will forgery and probate fraud. He asked me how solid my evidence was. "I'm an estate attorney," I said. "It's airtight." There was a moment's pause, and he said, "Send me everything." I want to stop here for a second because a few of you might be wondering why I didn't call Daniel, why I didn't sit him down and give him a chance to explain himself, or come clean, or return the codicil before it went any further. Some of you might think that's what a good sister, a good person, would do. And I want to be honest with you about something. I thought about it. For about 30 seconds, standing in my kitchen with my phone in my hand, I thought about calling him. And then I remembered the look on his face when he photographed those pages, that small, satisfied nod. The way he set the folder on my coffee table instead of putting it back. He didn't come to my home looking for a charger. He came to my home to take something that wasn't his, and when he couldn't take the original, he took the information he needed to manufacture a replacement. He did not accidentally commit fraud. He planned it. Carefully enough to find a notary. Carefully enough to find 2 witnesses. Carefully enough to get it filed before I found out. He just wasn't careful enough to know that I already had him on camera walking through my front door. I did not call Daniel. I sent everything to the DA's office. The next 4 months were the quietest 4 months of my life. Probate was frozen pending investigation. The forged codicil was sent to a forensic document examiner who found, among other things, that the ink composition on the signature line was inconsistent with the pen found in my father's hospice room and that the paper stock did not match the legal pad my father had used for his personal notes. The notary, a man Daniel had apparently found through a mutual acquaintance, was interviewed. He retained a lawyer immediately, which told the investigators everything they needed to know. During those 4 months, I did not speak to Daniel. I did not speak to my mother, who called me 3 times in August, once to ask how I was doing and twice to tell me that Daniel was under a lot of stress and that I needed to think about the family. I listened to all 3 voicemails. I did not return them. My aunt, my father's younger sister, called me once. She said simply, "I know what he did, and I know what you're doing, and your father would be proud of you." Then she said, "How are you eating?" And we talked for 45 minutes about nothing important, and it was the best conversation I had that whole summer. The case went to a preliminary hearing in October. I attended. Daniel sat at the defendant's table in a suit, different from the funeral one, no tags this time, and he looked at me once, across the courtroom, and I held his gaze for about 3 seconds before looking back at the judge. His attorney had filed a motion arguing that Daniel had acted in good faith based on verbal representations made by our father, that he had genuinely believed the will as filed did not reflect our father's true intentions, that the codicil, while admittedly problematic in its execution, represented a sincere attempt to honor their relationship. The judge read the hospice records. The judge reviewed the forensic report. The judge looked at the security footage, which the prosecution had included in the evidentiary packet, of my brother letting himself into my home with a copied key and photographing my father's legal documents. The motion was denied. 4 months after the preliminary hearing, Daniel pleaded guilty to 1 count of will forgery and 1 count of attempted probate fraud. He was sentenced to 18 months of supervised probation, a $10,000 fine, mandatory restitution, and 200 hours of community service. His record would carry the felony. The gambling debts, as far as I know, he still has. The estate went through probate as written. The house is mine. My mother lives in the front bedroom and tends a small garden in the backyard. We talk most mornings over coffee. She has never apologized for the voicemails, and I have never brought them up. We have found a way to be in the same room that works for both of us, which is, I think, the most honest thing I can tell you about where that relationship stands. Daniel and I have not spoken since the hearing. I don't know if we ever will. I have thought about this more than I expected to. Not with grief, exactly, but with a kind of dull, recurring surprise. He was my brother for 31 years. We shared a house, shared a table, shared every family holiday there has ever been. And when something valuable was on the line, he walked into my home with a copied key and tried to rewrite a dead man's words. I don't know what to do with that, honestly. I'm not sure you ever fully know what to do with that. But I know what I didn't do, which was let it work. There is a particular kind of quiet that comes after you stop waiting for someone to be who you needed them to be. It's not happiness, exactly. It's not relief either, though there's some of that. It's more like the quiet after a door closes, not slammed, just closed, firmly, finally with a click. My home office has a new filing cabinet now. Electronic lock, biometric. Overkill, probably, by most standards. But I am an estate planning attorney, and I understand better than most people what original documents are worth, and I have learned, maybe later than I should have, that some things you lock not because you're afraid of strangers, but because you finally accept who the people with copied keys actually are. My father's will sits in that cabinet, the green-tabbed folder, same as always. Every so often, when I'm in the office late and the house is quiet, I think about him, about the way he used to sit at his kitchen table doing the crossword, about the way he said my name when he was proud of me, which was often, and the way he shook his head when Daniel came up in conversation, which was the saddest version of "I told you," so I have ever witnessed. He knew. Fathers usually do, I think. He just hoped he was wrong. He wasn't, but he made sure, before he left, that it wouldn't matter. That's the thing about a properly executed will. When everything else falls apart, it holds. If this story meant something to you, please leave a like. It genuinely helps this channel reach people who need to hear it. And if you've been through something like this, a family member who took something that wasn't theirs, a document, a dollar amount, a piece of trust, leave it in the comments. You are not alone in this. I read every word. I'll see you in the next one. There is something I've learned about the way consequences work, not through luck, not through fate, but through the simple, relentless logic of cause and effect. What a person does in private when they believe no one is watching is the most honest version of who they are. Daniel walked into my home with a copied key. He went directly to my office. He photographed my father's will and used those photographs to build a forgery. Every one of those choices was deliberate. Every one of them had a cost he hadn't finished paying yet. I think about that a lot. The idea that the outcome of this story wasn't decided the day the investigators showed up, or the day the forensic examiner submitted her report, or even the day Daniel stood in a courtroom and pleaded guilty. It was decided the day he chose to make a copy of my key without telling me. That was the first domino. Everything after was just physics. I am not a perfect person. I am not a particularly patient one either. There were moments in those months, sitting with frozen probate paperwork, listening to my mother's voicemails, watching the clock in Rachel's office, when I wanted to scream, or cry, or call Daniel and ask him how he could have done this to our father's memory. I didn't do any of those things. Not because I was especially strong, but because I had been trained by years of work and study to understand that the evidence speaks louder than I ever could. Staying quiet wasn't resignation, it was strategy, and more than strategy, it was integrity. It was the refusal to become what I was fighting against. That's the thing about building a life on the foundation of actual competence, actual ethics, actual preparation. When someone tries to tear it down, they keep running into the parts they didn't know were there. Daniel saw a folder. He didn't see the camera. He saw a signature line. He didn't see the forensic trail. He saw a window of opportunity. He didn't see that I had already documented every inch of the room. Intelligence without ethics is just cleverness, and cleverness runs out. Daniel was clever enough to find a notary and manufacture a document. He was not wise enough to understand that the woman he was stealing from had spent her entire career learning exactly how people like him get caught. The gap between those two things, between being clever and being prepared, is where his plan fell apart. What I want you to take from this, if you take anything, the work you do quietly, before anyone is watching, before any crisis arrives, is the work that saves you when everything goes wrong. I built my practice carefully. I filed my father's documents correctly. I installed a camera for reasons that had nothing to do with my brother. None of that felt heroic at the time. It was just the right thing, done the right way, on an ordinary Tuesday. And when it mattered, it was enough. You don't need to be loud. You don't need to threaten. You don't need to win arguments at dinner tables or send angry texts or make sure everyone knows you are right. You just need to do the work, hold the line, and trust that a life built honestly is harder to take than most people expect. My father knew that. He put it in writing, and it held.